Pacific Islander Student Center supports students from all around the Pacific. These are just some of the greetings of the students that you support here at UH Hilo. I like to put that up anytime I at least have some presentation. Just to, I think, make the point that students that we support here all come from different languages and cultures. So in some ways it's unfair for us to try to figure out what works for the Pacific Islander students because there really is no such thing. I mean, people call these group of students Pacific Islanders or Micronesians, maybe sometimes Polynesians. But the fact is that they all come unique to their own cultures and languages, and they bring it to our community to enrich us. And so that's what I like to make this just a point. Our agenda for the day is pretty simple. I'm just going to spend a few minutes to talk about the center for the sake of those who have never gone up to the center or know what kind of support services we provide for our students. That way, in your engagement with the students, you can also help them understand what these services are. And then I'll turn it right over to my colleague Denise to go right into really the main reason why we're all here, which is the research, and then a discussion on some of the tips that she's learned, gleaned from the research that she's been involved in with us. If you look around, there's some students, and indicated in my email, there are some students that I've invited to be here as part of the discussion, not necessarily to make another presentation, but really just to provide some point of view. Everything that we're presenting here today, at least from the perspective of the research, is from the students. I know that we've, thanks to those of you who participated in the one-on-one discussion with Denise and the focus group that we're trying to do anything. And this, essentially this event here also contributes to part of our research, so I'm really grateful to you for that. So just to set the stage for it, and Denise will talk a little bit more about this. Here's part of the challenge and part of the fun of the work that we do at the Pacific Islander Student Center. Unfortunately, we're charged by the NFPC grant, it's funded by the U.S. Department of Education, to support Pacific Islanders from the U.S. affiliated Pacific Island entities. U.S. affiliated Pacific Island entities. So unfortunately, even though there are students from all around the Pacific, you know, from Melanesia to Polynesia, really unfortunately, when it comes down to the data that we're collecting, it has to do with students that are coming from the U.S. affiliated Pacific Island nations of Federated States of Micronesia, Republic of the Marshall Islands, Guam, Commonwealth of the North Mariana Islands, Samoa, and Marshall Islands, I think I mentioned that. Even though that's what, you know, when people say Pacific Island Student Center, we do, I mean, the center is open to all students and all Pacific Islander students, but the research that we're doing and the data we're collecting is really focused on those students. Just so you know, and this is old news to Carla, because I presented this to the tutors in my conversation with them. As of August 26, 2014, the latest Discover report has it that there are students coming, 4 students coming from Guam, Saipan, from the Marshall Islands, about 31. This number, this is before, just so you know, before I think the completion of registration, so this number may have gone up a bit. And from the Federated States of Micronesia, of which 4 states are involved, Chuuk, Pushrai, Pohnpei, and Yap, and about 18 students from Palau, Republic of Palau. From American Samoa, 87 students. So from one, so that's the largest body or population enrollment of students from age-specific language group. Tonga 4, and then Vanuatu, Solomon Islands. Okay, so that's just as of August 26, 2014. Denise will go into the research and we'll talk about who this research encompasses, because it's more than this. Real quickly, we are the home away from home for our Pacific Island students. We're located in 307. Please come in at any time to operate. This semester, I just want to point out the hours. Ellen is not here as the director of the center, the campus center, because we've had to open our center now. As you know, it's inside the lobby, and as you know, 4:30, everything closes around here, right? And so we've petitioned, we've asked, and Ellen has been gracious to let the center open beyond the 4:30 closure. So, because there's been a need among students to have more spaces. Most of our students live up at Ash Housing, and so our own survey with them has informed us that they need a better study environment to support their needs. So that's what we have. You would have received our pamphlet. There's more of them out there. If you don't, just a glimpse of the things that we offer here, from advising to tutoring to study nights. And so that's what we have. Okay? So that's just a glimpse of that. If I haven't introduced myself, Vid Ratiar, I'm the director at the Pacific Island Student Center. And thank you so much for coming, and I'm really honored to have you all here. So, Dr. Denise Uehara is our researcher, is a member of our staff, so I won't need to put lay on her because she's part of our staff. She's part of our community.
I really struggled with how to format this, because the last time I was here it was more of a talking head type of session, and I really don't want to do that. We really wanted, and we found out that the discussion that happened after I talked most of the time was the enriching piece for, I think, the participants as well as for myself. So that's, we try to set it up so that we can engage in conversation. I'll show slides, and I do encourage you to sort of consider the slide, chew on it, think about it, and then see how that information relates to your own experiences and your own interactions here at Hilo and with particularly our Pacific Islander students. So I do encourage you to just, even though it's really big, the group, just please interject, and if a thought comes to mind, please say something or relate an experience, because I really want this to be sort of a give and take conversation. And then you can ask me if you want the slides. A lot of it is just preliminary analysis that we've done. So I'm going to just ask you that, if I send it to you, don't cite it yet, or don't hand it out, because it's still preliminary. But we don't have a handout particularly for the slides. I'll give you a handout after when we get to it. As Vid said, we have a diverse group of students from the Pacific here. This is just the data that we have from the Discover data set. Typically for this fall, and as in the past trends, we have a lot more females who are enrolling from the Pacific than the males. Ethnicity, you can see we have it according to the data that I draw down from the Discover data sets, Tongan, Samoan, other Pacific, mixed Pacific, Micronesian. And I was talking with Uncle Craig about that. What's interesting is that in the OP, the other Pacific category, a lot of students from Marshalls and from Palau do not, that's where they're identifying themselves. They're not self-identifying as Micronesian. So, that's just, to me, that I have to actually go in and pull out or aggregate that data to make some sense of it. But I found that really interesting because geographically, I think Marshallese and Palauans are considered Micronesian, but when they self-identify, they're not wanting to be in the Micronesian category. So I'm not sure if you folks are seeing anything like that. I see a lot of heads nodding, and we're talking about that, and it could be sort of a negative connotation that's come up in recent years, particularly with the Micronesian ethnicity category. So that's, that, like I said, I have to go in and look at it, because that can mess up some of the analysis, how students self-identify and what we're finding. And then admission type, you probably know this too, we have lots of transfer students from the Pacific. from community colleges, from their local community colleges, more so than freshmen, true freshmen coming in from high school. And then we just looked at 5 years, and it's pretty similar. You got more females enrolling each year, and this is just fall data that we look at. Ethnicity tends to be Micronesian, Samoan, and then again transfer students. And then in a previous analysis, which I shared in the spring, we have a lot more females enrolling, but it's the males who are more likely to graduate. And so, and of course, the first thought is pregnancy. That's what we're seeing is with the female, and then maternal responsibilities, taking care of family issues that come up. But the males are graduating at a higher rate than the females. And then again, this is from the data set citizenship, and it's self-report. So a lot of it is just blank. And I do want to just say, I don't know if any of you are able to access the Discover data sets if you've ever been in there. It's pretty inconsistent, and it's like I always have to say a caveat about whenever I do analysis with that data set because students show up twice in it. Sometimes they show up 3 times. Sometimes they don't show up the next year or the third semester, even though they actually are enrolled. So there's a lot of inconsistencies when looking at that. And a lot of it, I think, maybe because it's hand-entered and self-report, but you can just sort of see where they're claiming their citizenships. And then here, this is where it comes out. You see the Marshalls and Palau. And then this is just an example of the kinds of questions we're asking. It's really exploratory. Relationships between select variables and persistence rates. So do students persist from one year to the next, from fall to fall? Just looking at that, and are there variables that could relate to them persisting? And again, it's available scores that we have enough of to say anything about. So scores, entrance exam, listening, financial status, ethnicity, gender, and enrollment. And again, we just find that there's really, for that 1 year persistence, no differences between males and females, no difference in ethnicity. But again, this is still, the first time we ran it, there was differences because we pulled out this, because a lot of the Marshallese kids and the Palauans were in the OP category. And so that's where we saw some significance. So it's just kind of running it different ways and looking at it, but I don't want to pit one group against another or have folks walk away with something like, well, Marshallese are graduating at higher rates anyway, or they're persisting, so maybe they don't need as much supports. It's just sort of like digesting all this information, and it's how you slice and dice it, and sort of taking the data with a grain of salt, because I understand that it is self-reported and it's inconsistent. No differences between freshmen and transfers when they first get here. That first year they are persisting. And then the unmet need, we got this from the financial data sets. So even though it's not, these aren't significant, there was something that we noticed was that students who persisted had lower dollar amounts than those who did not persist. So they're getting they are persisting, but it's just dependent on how much their need is. You guys can feel free to have any thoughts coming to you so far with your students, or does this sort of make sense? And students are here too because we also want to hear from them, sort of their perspective and experiences. The TOEFL scores, this is again what we could find in that data set. And this sort of makes sense. Students who have higher TOEFL scores are more likely to persist, but they already started at a high point, and the n size is pretty small, so it's not unlikely that we wouldn't find significance. But for those, I don't know much about the TOEFL. Does anybody have experience with that, or can speak to the TOEFL? So, like I said, it's just kind of pulling out what is there in those data sets and trying to make sense of it. And then we also did some predictions, looking at gender, the Hilo entrance exam, which I think is actually called speaking, listening, unmet need, and Hilo GPA. So there was significance in the GPA and listening factors. The higher the scores for both GPA and listening, the more likely your student is to persist. And that sort of makes sense logically. Does anybody know anything about the UH Hilo entrance exam? Stuff like that? No?
Well, they have this, for English, those that don't speak English, the writing listening, and then
That's that?
it's grammar, listening, reading. It's really hard to hear with the listening vision.
Oh, okay.
Didn't hear a word she said.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna have to speak up because
Yeah, I
the
know,
AC.
sorry, yeah. So I just asked what is listening, so you actually have to listen to a tape. Students could ask,
So what's that doing?
So when you put this exam, are so you're referring to,
UHHS. It's I guess I'm not sure. It's in the test data set, and the code is UHHS.
UHHS is writing placement specifically. But really, through the ELI program, administers another exam, or set of exams that test for listening, reading, grammar. So they're two separate assessments. But if you're looking at the code UHHS, that's specifically writing only. So that's the
Yes.
UH Hilo writing class.
Okay. Isn't there one with M and a W?
UHHW is the writing placement, but that's for native speakers. So it's to determine placement into a 100 level English or ESL 100 level course. So if you're looking at UHHS, the counterpart would be UHHW.
Okay.
The test code is for placement into that traditional freshman composition course. And in the English department, that would be 100, 102 with the honors. And in the ESL, it would be ESL 100 or ESL 102.
Okay. Okay, because I know they just changed the coding of, like if a 1 is in front of it, you test it out or something like that too.
that's for our part.
That's real, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So there's actually, most students have 4 different scores. So they would have a separate score for reading, one for writing, one for listening, and one for writing.
okay.
So it's just, we can talk about what
Yeah.
those codes look like, so you can add.
Because I'll get updates from Jim about like how the coding is, and then I'll let him know what in the data set what was analyzed. So this one actually went with, it said speaking, listening. Does that make any sense? Speaking / listening, and then later I was told there really isn't a speaking section.
Those codes are used only for to determine placement. So all that does is tell us what course is the student placed into. So the
Okay.
student still has to get registered for the course, and then of course at the end of the semester, can generate an exit grade. But those codes that you're referring to are only to determine what course does the student begin at.
Okay. Okay. Okay, now I have to rethink that. Okay, let's go to. Okay, then this SAT.
The higher placement in listening, speaking, and even though it's not a score, could you go back to
Yeah.
that slide before?
Yeah.
At the bottom, the higher the placement for the listening score, plus the higher the GPA.
Is the
Could you read
higher,
that last sentence?
because if I use that data and it's a placement, then it's the placement score in that listening category, then they're more likely to persist.
That makes sense.
That, I was gonna say that kind of does when I say it out loud because
Some of the conversations I've had with students is the frustration that they have with the remedial approach to get just to English 100. And sometimes they get frustrated with that process of having to take English this, English that, just before I can get the credit for 100 so that I can move on to my other courses. I've heard some of the frustrations with that process.
it's okay. The process is frustrating, but it's needed though, right? So that they can get just some background that's not uncommon, even at the community college. Like I know, particularly in American Samoa, just to get to the college level courses, the kids are needing to take a lot of the developmental. And so in talking with the president there, his frustration is what's happening at the high schools, and then they're to just get them to the levels that they need to be performing even at ASCC. So secondary, again, this is just what was available. Freshmen had SAT scores, and SAT writing we saw as the predictor of college GPA. Reading and writing correlated with GPA, where GPA increases the higher the reading and writing scores, and that I think makes sense. Writing is interesting in that writing is sort of like the outcome, a demonstration, your performance indicator, and writing is, I think, just in college level work in anything is just an important skill to have, to be able to articulate your ideas clearly with a purpose. And I was just fortunate to be in American Samoa a couple weeks ago and visited schools across the main island from elementary to high school, and it's just sort of very clear. And I was asked to do these observations, but it's very clear to me from grade K and up, that piece and just the overall instruction is a bit that's where they're working on, and they acknowledge that it's the teaching and getting students actually learning in the classroom, whatever it is that the objective is supposed to be taught. So they're very well aware of where the challenges are, and that's why they're trying to beef up their teacher evaluations, the teacher quality. But just across the classrooms, it was a clear challenge for teachers not only to know the content well, but to teach it and get away from that rote, closed yes-no type of questions, but getting students to extend beyond a yes-no type of a question. And so that's sort of the background where our students, I think, are coming from in terms of that kind of academic experience of critical thinking, knowing the differences between different types of writing. And I know that, the commonality, or not what is that? We had talked about, the perception is that American Samoa is maybe a step above some of the FSM states in terms of educational systems and how they're educating the students, but I'm not quite sure that that's true just after being in the schools this past couple of weeks. And that's not to say that they're not doing that well, but I think, there was some good teaching that I saw, but there's also a lot to be said about let's just move the bar a little bit higher. And then again, this is just a scary looking table, but it's just tracking persistence from year to year, and then we also have data from like who's graduating. So again, it's sort of iffy. I'm not sure how consistent, because sometimes folks show up in the third semester saying that they were enrolled 2 semesters ago, and then when you look at that original data set, they're not in there again. So it's just kind of take it with a grain of salt. But you can just see 2005, there were actually no freshmen that year. So I just kind of thought that was interesting. And Uncle Craig and I had a conversation about, okay, did something happen that year? There was just no freshmen who started during that year. We did have transfer students, and you can just see this is just looking at persistence, right? 58% from this 100%, 29% for this 100. So we're not looking just looking at from when they started their rates. So we see some consistency, at least sort of the first in 2006 freshmen kind of held their numbers, but it's not high. And this is like the overall average of the previous chart. Again, you have freshmen who started from 100%, transfers 100%, then you're going to the second year, 63% of this 100%, and then 46% of this 100%. Then this one just tracks them from the year before. So here it was 100%, then the second year was 63% of that 100%, then by the third year it's 71% of this 63%, and then 85% of the 71%. So you kind of see at least the fourth year freshmen, if they're going to get that far, they're getting that far in terms of, okay, they got here. You know, I would like to see higher numbers, but that's promising, I think, for freshmen. For transfers, it's kind of a different story, and we've been talking about, you know, you assume that transfers already have some college experience. So they've got 2 years under their belt of, okay, I'm headed in the right direction. But we're finding that with transfers, if they go longer, the longer they stay, the more likely that they won't graduate. And that's kind of something that's been coming up when we're mixing, when we're cross-analyzing our findings. So for this one, it's year-to-year persistence rates are similar. They're kind of starting off, same levels of drop-offs. Year 4 persistence for freshmen appear higher than second and third, so they can get to the fourth. More kids are getting to the fourth year if they can get to that fourth year. And then year 4 persistence rates for transfer students are lower than freshmen. But you're also, like I said, they sort of have 2 years under their belt, so the chances for them to graduate is higher. But if they go beyond, if they keep being enrolled and they're not progressing, then they're just not graduating. So does that make sense? And that's
Are transfer students more likely to be part-time students than
not necessarily. A lot of our kids, Pacific Islanders, are full-time students. What we're finding though is that it's like a kind of a revolving door. Whether they're freshmen or transfers, they tend to like drop, but then they come back at some point. But we don't know, it's hard to know how long it takes for them when they do discontinue and then when they come back, because I don't know if they're coming back here necessarily or another university or another school, but we see a lot of the R category means they return.
Is it correlated with grade?
The dropout, that's one thing we're thinking it could be the unmet need. Yeah.
They have to start paying for credits, so they only take 1 or 2 classes a semester.
It could, yeah, and we've got, I don't know if this is appropriate, but you had said you found out about like when the financial aid kicks in and how they have credit from a different, like where they're coming from. Money is sort of not, the scholarships can become really, yeah.
Some students are still waiting for their fall money. They said they're waiting for their
But I think back at home where they're from, the scholarship money, it'll come and it's okay, they get credit for it. Like, that's okay, you can still enroll, you can still take courses. Is that what you're...
Yeah, and actually this is from, shared from Travis. Travis can choose some stuff.
Well, where the college where I transfer from, we go to classes, we move into dorms without having to pay for anything up front. So the way we do it is we just go to the bookstores, dorms, and we go to class, we get all our stuff and we don't pay for anything. So after we go to class and when our scholarship and the Bell Grant money kick in, then they pay for it. So you don't have to pay for anything. just go to class, and everything is basically free.
So it's pretty much on credit. So students, this is College of Micronesia, so a lot of the students come here thinking that that's the same process here, and that's what he went through too. So that's
It's one problem.
So they didn't. Many don't realize that you have to have so much money up front to pay for everything, housing, books, and all that. So I think a number of you faculty have indicated to us that the number of students don't have their books. In the middle of the semester, students still don't have their textbooks, and that's a big challenge. Just because of
Oh, thank you.
Think about the total number of semesters of federal eligibility for Pell Grant. And UH Hilo, unlike some other campuses used to, and I think still does, give 10 instead of 8. But if you spend 2 years in a community college, either in Hawaii or out there, either the College of the Marshall Islands or COM Ponte or Palau Community College, or even a community college in Guam or the College of the Northern Marianas, you might have used up 3, 4, 5 semesters. Then you come here, you've had no upper division courses. And if you're in a STEM discipline, you don't have the prerequisites to be successful in that in another 4 to even 5 or 6 semesters. So it's harder depending upon the major you're in and the tracking of that, and whether you get the prerequisites that you need early enough. And so one thing to look at is HCC has a special program to smooth transfers here, and that may or may not be working well. I don't know enough about it. But for some disciplines, it's better to encourage students to transfer earlier than later, even if they can get their Gen Ed core requirements waived if they have an AA, because then they'll get tracked into the courses that are prereq for the next courses, etc. Otherwise, it's going to take another 2 or 3 semesters to finish without aid, and that's a struggle. Some of them do it successfully, some of them don't.
Shanna,
I just wanted to add that it's not, the Pell eligibility is not specific to UH Hilo. That it's a federal limit. They get 600%, so one academic year, if they go full-time in the fall, full-time in the spring, they will use 100% of their eligibility. So if you're enrolling full-time every semester, you can have a Pell Grant for 6 full academic years. So with students from FSM, from the Federated States of Micronesia, those who don't have U.S. Social Security numbers, those students actually could end up getting a Pell Grant for more than 600%, simply because there's no way for them, for the DOE to track them, because they don't have a Social Security number for them to track. So it's fixed.
I was gonna say now, today, okay.
Wait, don't fix it. Don't fix it.
It's fixed. But say for those students who started school maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, went to community college, got a Pell Grant for 3 years, depending on how they, what Social Security number they use at that time, that number could be lost, and they could possibly come here and get 6 more years of Pell Grant. But the federal government fixed it. So yes, it's not 600% basically is the limit. So it's stretched out. So if the students come half-time, they only enroll half-time, they can get a half-time Pell Grant for 12 years if they only enroll. So it's just that percentage. So each year, depending on what your enrollment is, determines how much of that percentage you use for. And that's when you said it has something to do with financial aid, it does have a big part to do with financial aid, because like Jeffrey said, they end up losing their eligibility. Will say they get a degree from College of Micronesia, that doesn't necessarily, the classes that they took there don't necessarily transfer or aren't applicable to their degree here. Whatever the admissions office takes in as transfer credits, we count towards their what is it, PACE? We call it PACE, or what is
opposite. Satisfactory academic progress, where they only get a certain amount of credits that they can get paid for. So a lot of students run into that problem too.
Yeah.
Changing majors, coming here and figuring out that they don't want to be a marine science major anymore, and they want to switch to sociology or whatever it is. But you've already used up.
Yeah. Okay.
So that has
Maybe that's to me that's interesting and informative. So that's like kind of good information to know. So letting students kind of know you sort of have a certain amount, and if you do certain things, it's gonna be.
And now I think because we have a conference that we go to, and a lot of the colleges from College of Micronesia, from Guam, from American Samoa, they are there, and the information is given there. So I think it's being disseminated out so that they come knowing. There's a lot of students that come now. Can you check how much Pell Grant I have left? And they just started.
Right. Okay.
So I'm like,
yeah.
Right on.
That's
checking.
yeah.
So they're being proactive so that they know I only have this amount of time.
Okay.
So we try to tell them from our side, we don't claim to be advisors or anything, but we try to tell them only take the classes that you need. Because at some point it's gonna run out.
Yeah.
Which is then, so what we were talking about before with that they have to take so many classes, preparatory classes, before they can get their English 100.
Yeah.
So if they're all the more, you guys can verify. I mean, it must be really frustrating that you're sitting there waiting, I only have this much, and I'm not even getting credits for it.
I mean, granted, we give them 160 credits to get financial aid for, and the normal bachelor's degree is about 120. But still, you would be surprised at how many students transfer here. I mean, U.S. citizen students transfer here with like 160 credits, and they don't have a bachelor's degree yet. So, right, somebody's not either that or they need to change their majors.
I have a question about how do these grades compare to other students that are on campus? I said, how do these grades compare to other students on campus in terms of the numbers going down every year? Because it seems like they start off and then by the end there's hardly any graduates.
All right. I think in we have a lot of dismissals compared to the rest of the student population. I can't speak to the graduation rates of the rest of the, but we're just looking at some of the spring data. We have a lot of kids on probation. About a quarter of the population is Pacific Islanders that are on probation, and then another. It's not in mine.
Let me just to answer that question, I think that's important, real quick.
Yeah.
It's actually in the so this is something that really is part of my so 5.6% of UH Hilo are Pacific Islander students. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. They make up 24% of students on probation. Okay? 21% of all dismissed students are Pacific Islander students. So this is the disturbing data for us, for me at the center. This is all based on spring 14. 14% of all UH students are not making satisfaction, compared to 34% of all Pacific Islander students. Right? So this is the comparison that Yolisa is asking. How do we, as of spring 2014, this data is based on that. Where do we stand, in relation to all the students here at UH Hilo? That's. I didn't thank you yet. Thank you. Let's go.
I'm just trying to be cognizant of the time because I do want to get to the handout and the discussion. So again, this is based off of the spring data transfers, we had 137 freshmen, 42. Of those transfers, 16 were dismissed, 22 on probation, 16 for the first time on probation. And you can see the numbers, sort of their status of
So
what's...
this is the beginning of spring 2014, and of that 16 were
I think this is towards the end of spring, the counts at the end of spring, and going into the fall semester, what their status is.
And just, I don't know if this changes, and as I was telling Denise at the beginning of the session, it doesn't change the reality, because many of these students, the dismissed students, have been readmitted, but that's a snapshot, again, of students who were dismissed. Many of them have petitioned, and many of them have been readmitted. We don't have the data yet of those 16 students that say transfers. How many of them have been readmitted?
There's about 9.
Okay, so 9 of them now are still in the system, and so.
So this is primary data. So this is data that I actually collect myself via this huge survey that goes out, that was fielded. The first time we did it was just currently enrolled students during the fall 2012 semester, and we had a really good response rate, but that was including continuing classifieds and then the new kids. And that's sort of like when Vid and I and Daisha came on board. I just wanted to get a picture at that point. And then I continued to do the survey with just new enrolled students throughout. So this is just proof house of the respondents. Again, more females in the data pool who took the survey. And then this is what we don't get from the ODS data set, the discoverers, where they're coming from, public or private high schools. And that kind of makes a difference, I think, in terms of the quality of their education. A lot of times we're told, don't even use GPA as any kind of variable or any kind of marker to factor into our analysis, because the GPAs, particularly from the public schools, are sort of not reliable, not very valid. And I actually kind of saw that a couple weeks ago, just looking at grade books of teachers' classrooms. Just trying to make sense of the grading system. First of all, nothing was labeled as far as what they were getting scores on, but a lot of the grade books just had like all students getting 20 out of 20 points, 20 out of 20, 17 out of 17, and just kind of wondering about the grading system in the public schools, where a lot of our kids are coming from as well. So that, did you want to speak to anything about that? Yeah.
The other thing that related to GPA, the fact is that the published admission process for this university does look at GPA, right? If they have a 3.0, this is my understanding, I don't know if the admissions here, but if they have a 3.0, then the university does not look at their SAT scores. They're admitted basically based on grades and classes they've taken and on that GPA. So you could have 3.0 freshmen, 4.0 students here who are coming from public schools, in which that GPA is very inflated, so they come thinking that they're ready. And I think that's one of the things that's really challenging for us. To I'm like, oh no, we're good. We're honor students. Only to really face the reality that those public schools have not adequately prepared them for college. Right? So this is, one of the things I think on next step of our research is to present these to schools, the feeder schools, community colleges, high schools, to present some of these data to kind of wake them up a little bit.
I was going to say, one of the other things, having worked with your system, I know that a lot of kids tend to, if they don't come here, or might need college, they won't even take the SAT because they know that they can get it without it. It's only the kids going to the mainland that will often go the SAT or the ACT. Because I know it's really difficult. So, and I do know that some of the schools encourage them to take the ACT if they feel like the SAT is too much. But you may see that some of them don't even take it. Or if they do, they take it, spring of the graduation year because it's their very last chance that they can take it in the fall.
I think
So this university doesn't have any essays or whatever for diversity pieces that are not captured on demographics at all? my question. Like, is there, we just go off GPA and SAT?
If you want a scholarship, you have to do this.
But
Not
really?
for actual answers.
Oh, because that controls for diversity factors too as well, to have essays and to have a screening committee for those. I mean, I know there's a GPA cutoff, SAT, but then I'm just thinking about other things that are not measured on just grades alone for the diversity of the student population.
You know that honor
So no essay.
situations when students, I know the student has student reading school well and is probably classified as a special education student. And I know they wrote to the university and asked for consideration, and I don't know what else they had to do. But that person got into the department and the student was able to do okay. So I know that there's, there's ways, but if you don't know to do that, and you have people say, you know what, why don't you write it and ask them? It's not standard.
And I think what you, like, the process and looking at the grades, and also, like when Vid said they're inflated, it's sort of kind of part and parcel with, I don't want to say a culture, but that environment. When you look at teacher evaluation scores, those are kind of inflated too. So you've got sort of a trend of teachers getting high remarks for their teaching, and then teachers passing along high grades to their students. I know that there's been in high school situations, students passing classes because it's somebody's daughter, or they don't, it's like the relationships are so important in these places. You just don't want to stir the pot by not passing a student because you know the parent or they're from your village. So that's, aside from having a different perception of how you are doing academically, you could have just been passed along because of who you are. And I just recently heard stories like that happening. So this is again, we asked specifically where our students are from, and of the 266, we asked them what islands specifically. And this is, I think, it's just so neat to look at, because I would keep learning it. When I see something, adult or Umana, I look that up because my experience has only been to the main island of, on Chuuk. And just from my experiences being in Palauan classrooms, Chuukese, Marshallese, Pohnpeian classrooms, it's just sort of I don't want to generalize, but a lot of the instruction is still rows, response, close-ended questions, response, back and forth, and just not getting at that deeper learning, being able to relate the text or the story to their own personal experiences or the environment if it's a science class.
This is emergency, public announcement. Exo just apparently broke a pipe downstairs. They're about to close the bathroom for the next 2 hours. Everybody wants to take their position as well. Otherwise, 2 hours. That's it. That's a disclaimer.
But what's interesting is that, if someone says they're from Chuuk, they could be from one of the lagoon islands or from the neighboring area islands. Same thing with Pohnpei, and there's just, even within the islands itself, there's different dialects. Even on an island, there's northern and southern dialects, and then cultures. So I think this one is amazing. In Pohnpei, on the main island, there's actually a village of Polynesians from Pingamorangi who migrated there, and they have their own culture and language right there in the middle of Pohnpei, where everything else is Pohnpeian. But you go to the Pingamorangi village and you see kind of Polynesian culture and language and artwork there. So just giving you an idea of just that the diversity within each of the different island states. So did you want to say anything more about lagoon versus bigger?
No, I think you made it.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to add my own personal story. This is from like 10 years ago in teaching a marine science classes, that I had a student there that everybody, it was an internship class, and I had one guy from, whose mom was from Hilo, his dad was from Mokiu, which is up there, but And but he had grown up on Pohnpei and in Guam, and had spent some time in Chuuk. I think there was a Chuukese grandmother or something. Anyways, and everybody, he had been very, very quiet at the back of the class, and so I knew how many languages he spoke. So when I brought that out in class, all these people are kind of like, some of the other students are like, oh yeah, why would you ask him this question? Because I said, how many, I pulled him, I was like, so how many languages do you know? I forget, how many languages? And he's like, and he's being really quiet, and people are looking around like, well, obviously, why would you ask this question? But he was counting, and I knew he was counting. He's like, well, what do you mean by speak? Or what do you mean, what do you mean know? And I was like, well, how many do you speak? And he said, well, I speak 4. 5, counting English, and it was very telling, because I think it's one of those things that I think a lot of our other students don't recognize this, that we're talking multilingual, which is an incredible asset of diversity here on campus. And I think it's really
And then you have to understand, some of the islands don't have electricity and running water, and there's just one school, K through 6 or something, and then they take a boat to the main island for middle school. I know that's for American Samoa, and I think for some of the other islands that's true as well. So the resources on the aside from the main islands are also can be challenging. And then this is just again looking at primary data from that fall big survey that we administered. Is there relationships between these constructs are supposed to contribute to persistence and graduation. So that's how we looked at identity, social supports, and self-efficacy. How confident are you to be able to do college level work? And then looked at relationship with GPA. So not surprisingly, self-efficacy is significantly correlated. Students who have higher self-confidence about their abilities to do college level work tend to have higher GPAs. But if you think about, okay, that makes sense. They're coming here with a good sense of where they're standing because of the grades that they've gotten in the past. But sort of over the course of the semesters, we're finding reality sets in. And so when you look at preparedness, it's the same survey 2012, but I was able to pull out the students who have been continuing classified. I've been here a little bit longer than those who are newly enrolled, and there was a difference. So those who have been here longer realize that I'm not as prepared as I thought I was. And the kids coming here are saying, yeah, I'm prepared, I can do this work. So that sort of is kind of along the lines of what we've been talking about. So kids do feel at the beginning that I am prepared, but we found out in our focus groups, after at least a semester here, they're telling me I'm just not ready to do the work that's expected of me. So that's about what I said. Then I just wanted to show this because we did want to get information from students who already got their bachelor's degree. They made it. What are some of the indicators for their success because they graduated? And of course, once they leave, they don't really want to hear from anybody, but I'm kind of happy with that. I even got 24% that they did the online survey. I kept following up. Please do this survey. You graduated, you're an example. So we had some indicators, and then normally I just wanted to group them together as a set of graduates and say something about them, but then when we fielded it twice for students who graduated during different cluster years, so fall 2011, spring 2012, and then thereon after till I think spring 2013. So there was a difference, so we fielded it in 2013 and 2014, different clusters of graduates. It's kind of interesting because the cultural congruence in the university environment is different. So I'm just sort of wondering if there was something that happened between, I think, 2011, 12, 13, that for students to feel like, wow, the cultural like my cultural values don't necessarily align with the university. And this university environment wasn't as positive an experience for them, just based on when you just compare the two sets of administrations of this survey itself. So that's kind of what I found interesting. And then when we looked at you just look at the individual items to make for each of the constructs, and there's huge discrepancies in there, and it's so big that I don't trust it, so I have to go back and look at it again, because really like really bad university environment type of scores and no congruence, like I just don't fit here. So I just kind of am wondering if you guys see any, does that,
With 24 respondents.
yeah, you can't see them.
I mean, when the question is whether they have had an association with the Pacific Island Student Center.
No, see, it's nothing to do with specifics like that, but just, I could talk to professors or, this, and I could give, there's each of the constructs has items, and the items are what feed into the bigger score, but those items are really low too. I mean, low in the sense that no congruence, bad university environment, so. Can you speak a little louder, sir?
Yeah, one of the things I've talked to the faculty about is, this whole, cultural competency and learning styles, and where Pacific Islanders are coming from, from an affiliation background versus a university, which is, based on a more Western, process and looking at sort of more individualistic. So I think some of this, what they could be responding to is that, one thing, there's lack of role models, from their own, ethnic background. They're just the whole level of the education system sometimes is incongruent with, sometimes I've had the faculty ask, how do you get these students to ask questions in such a class? And it's very difficult for some of the students, and sometimes they have to go through this process of learning how to do that, but it's different from their, upbringing and background, and that's true of even a lot of our local students too. Where,
it's a learned skill to be able to talk about, to present and be articulate about what you know, and I think locally too, it's just, we don't do that. We're not comfortable doing that. Did you pass out the...
Learn skill for your teachers also to elicit from the Islander students, to have that kind of empathy.
Yeah.
I had one Islander student, she never said a word. So yes was this. I had to watch very carefully. And I told the whole class, and everybody was so supportive. And she was blushing that, and I was like, isn't that right? And she would do this, or she was a cheeky.
Does everyone see when she's raising her eyebrows? That's a cue, an Islander.
That's the cue, right? Really, she was so sweet and so quiet. But in groups, she was fine.
Yeah.
Just at a hole in front of the whole class.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, we'll do the tips, because I'm trying to be cognizant of the time. So that is one of the things, it's not wanting to be called out and singled out and have the attention on you when you're in class. Doesn't mean that they don't know or understand what's happening, but just don't call on me, don't bring attention to me. And then there's other reasons too, a lot of it has to do with the accent. That's what came out in the talk stories that I had with a lot of the students over the course of the year. So here I talked to 81 students, 2 semesters, looked at the data. And that tip sheet is pretty much what came out from different resources and sources about what is it that is sort of like a cultural nuance, a concept, or a research finding. How is it manifested? We didn't want to say demonstrated, but how is it enacted, this concept or this cultural nuance or this finding? And then what are some suggestions that we can use to better support our students? And then for this slide, and what we're going to do, what I put here is, and it's not in the paper, but sometimes these cultural nuances can be misinterpreted or misperceived as maybe lack of engagement or not wanting to participate or just ignoring. But it's not necessarily that. It's just sort of a way of being that they've been sort of socialized and educated into that type of a behavior, which doesn't always mix with what we know of as a Western, university setting. So I just wanted to give you guys a chance to look over that and see, and it's in no way telling you that one of the things that came out in our conversations about developing this was that it's not like we don't want to have special treatment, and it's not looking at special treatment. It's just acknowledging that there are some differences in our students, and actually sometimes I think what's good for our Pacific Islander students are good for all students. It's sort of like special education teaching techniques. I always think that, well, that's great for gen ed kids too. Why wouldn't you want to do that practice so that all kids can get that information? So this gives you a
There's 9 items here, just pointing that out. Right?
Yeah, there's 9. Yeah.
Do your students, your Pacific Island students validate this? Do they read this and say yes?
I actually read it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been validated. I think that part is very important because also, oftentimes when I see people try to do transcultural adaptation or anything, it's usually the newcomer who comes into them trying to orient the other new people, but it's really not validated, so they continue some misinformation and myths, and so I think it's important that it's validated by us.
And one thing that what I'm fortunate is that my research assistant is from actually. So a lot of the stuff, the information, the data that comes out, I send it to him and we have discussions. Does that make sense? He goes back and gives his interpretations, and I talk to Vid, and even just with our focus groups. If I hear something, we have these conversations. So I'm glad you brought that up. And it's not, of course, every individual is an individual. So what I also heard from focus groups too was that, don't give me group assignments because I don't necessarily want to work with kids from where I'm from because they're going to make me do all the work because we're supposed to do this as a group thing. So on the same time they're like, they tell me, okay, but we're from X place, but you can do it and we'll just get the credit. And so they're like, I don't want any group assignments. I can do this and they should do it on their own too. So, it's not meant to be a huge, broad generalization because everyone is an individual. But that's what I've heard. I've also heard, I don't hang out because, I can be here and be an individual, and I'm not going to hang out with my peer groups from where we're from together because I know I'm not going to be able to study. There's going to be expectations on me culturally, community, that if I'm here, I'm far, I'm removed from that setting at home, and here I can just concentrate. So if you are strong enough, I guess, and are determined enough, that's a strategy for some of the students to just sort of disassociate from their cultural group as well, because they know the pitfalls that they can fall into because of some of those expectations that you see there. So,
I know that, like the Marshallese has the Marshall Island Club, and the Samoans have the Samoan Club, and of course the showcase is the UN Day. But can there be some kind of association with creating study groups within your own culture? It's like, okay, we have brought this picture of UH now and what we have to do, so let's meet up here and do these assignments or do this or do that, so that they can have the best of both worlds, right?
I'll let Vin speak to that.
Vince.
So, to speak to this thing, so this actually, that's a really good point, because that has been raised, we've tried many, so we've done that approach, we've done the study 95 majors, we've done where we've asked the club officers to organize club study groups. None of these things have really panned out. That's no idea. Unfortunately, no idea. There are some, in some situations, I'll use we have one of our tutors is from the tribe, And so we essentially empowered him to say, okay, your job now is to figure out, we have a tutoring program called Tutor on Demand, essentially to try and deal with the issue of students being too embarrassed to openly seek help and get the tutoring that they need. So the Tutoring on Demand program is to have the tutors meet them anywhere, anytime, on weekends, not at the center. They can do it wherever they agree on. So basically by appointment. So we've done it where we asked one of our, just to experiment, one of our tutors to essentially focus on that community and figure out ways to help. He's getting paid to run those study groups or to do whatever it takes to get this community. But I don't know why the different study sessions haven't panned out. I mean, the latest thing is to open the center up because that has been determined as a need, a place for people to study, especially if they live up in Ashland, can't get to work, or people are coming in and out of their apartments because of the community. So just kind of sit down. And we've tried to really inform the students. This is a quiet zone. 5 o'clock to 10 is quiet zone. Lobby area, you can do group studies, but inside the same stuff, no TV, nothing. Just basically student stuff. So we started that this fall. So we'll see how that goes.
I think one of the key things that we're finding though is effective studying. So opportunity is there, but when we talk with the kids, it's like there's a range of how many hours they spend studying, prepping, for their classes. But when you look deeper, when you ask about what is it they're doing, like what is good study habits, what does that mean? And then, like I said, coming from the classrooms, even I was in last year's Saipan classrooms and just looking at how they're assessed, like amount of preparation that they need to have in order to pass the tests there is sort of, I don't want to say superficial, but maybe kind of surface, and not knowing how to have really good effective study skills to get at the depth and level of information that's needed, and then be able to expound on the information that they've taken in. And like I said, just that was pretty clear 2 weeks ago in the high school level literature classes. Yeah.
So my program here, Minority Access and Chemical PALS, here's something which is important. We have peer mentors that are more likely incoming students transfer as well as French learning. That's one of our mentorship programs and peer mentors. In the past, sometimes we've had successful study groups. This year, we kind of look at some peer mentors when we work with students on things like study skills, time management, and all these things. We also look at if there's a number of students having difficulty in a class, we try to do a study group. And in the past, sometimes it's really worked. This year, we tried one with organic chemistry. It started out and then it just kind of fizzled. So it's really hard to maintain it. But in the past, sometimes it's really worked and it's been really successful.
Given that you did find some differences by gender, I kind of find this a little gender neutral, and I wonder if more attention were paid to gendered interactions.
It could be, yeah.
You might get some insights into why you're getting the results you're getting.
Yeah, and actually that did come out, I'm trying to think which year it was, participation-wise too. If there's a higher male in one of the cultural groups in a class, their particular subject class, they just know they're going to withdraw that way, not because of any of the other factors, but because of the status of that male in that class. So that's something to think about too, is that the reasonings for certain behaviors could be gender specific. But you're right.
We have more and more women's studies content across campus, And I think this is something interesting that we could be discussing, in those classes and.
That's, I mean, and the
You know,
gender
female
thing,
role models.
yeah, that is huge, I think, particularly in the region, and we were finding that out several years ago when we go in and, do professional development with the teachers, and having male teachers in the same, workshops, that just wasn't flying with teachers, and certain status too wasn't working either. A lot of lessons that we learned along that too. But one of the things that we did talk about that kids were telling me is, yes, they've had maybe what they thought was prerequisites from the community colleges, but it wasn't enough. They feel like, gosh, I have to, just to get to here, what's expected, I gotta get here. And then on top of that, do the work to get there, because they don't have that foundational knowledge that was already expected of them. Even maybe they took a government class. A lot of the classes, from what I was told, it's an American government system in most of these areas, but yet it's kind of got their own flavor of their cultural background, their cultural context infused with the American system of government. So, they campaign, they do an election for the governor of, let's say, American Samoa. And I don't want to pick on them, but I just was recently there, and so I see, but yet the Fono, the Senate, is sort of only high chiefs can be in that, sit in that. And it's just sort of a different way of running the government, which doesn't necessarily align with U.S. government. How it's enacted back there is not necessarily the same as it is here. So that concept is a little different for kids to understand as well when they're coming here.
Just a question, actually this might be something you might, the question about, and this is something we haven't experimented in, which is the role, the gender, so anything that, any kind of support services, even within the community, even within the Pacific Island Center of our students, that's an area we haven't done to, let's say, to empower, let's say, the female students to say, figure out a way to, build community, learning communities among yourselves to see if that, we've assumed because of our cultures that a community of like-minded, culture, like-minded language is one. But actually, sometimes that actually gets in the way because of the embarrassment of showing that you don't, of your community, you may not know the content materials. That's what we've done in the major to see maybe they, having the same information, but we really haven't addressed the question of whether we need to look at gender-based support services, which would be, I think, the national concern. Is that something that's...
No, it's very much. I'm very much interested too in helping and developing any of that type of analysis. But I teach a lot of courses in gender-related issues, feminist philosophy, cultural diversity, and I have some Pacific Islander students that take my class. And every time we get to the subject of gender, and I always say, so how is it, because I'm learning about Pacific Island culture as well. And one of my students on the subject of patriarchy in like Samoa, for instance, I said, so does this, interesting gender relationship occur, how does that work in Samoa? And he would say, well, and then the other Samoans just kind of confirmed it too, but I was kind of like, he said that, yes, we live in it's patriarchal run. Samoa is like this kind of patriarchal run, but the women run things. So I'm kind of like, I didn't know, and they all confirmed it. They were like, yes, like they understood it. And because I don't have the direct relationship with that particular culture, and I haven't done research yet either in that area, there seems to be some kind of, much more complex gender organization, at least in my students' minds, in terms of how they recognize, the issue, what control and power means in a society, and how, perhaps
domestic life is run, right, within their homes. And so there's an interesting relationship. I mean, does that seem right to you?
Isn't that part of the definition? Maybe they don't really. I mean, the definitions of matriarchal society, because isn't Samoa a matriarchal society? Everything is passed down through the mother's name.
No.
That's micronation.
I don't know.
And the irony is that this is all changing.
Yeah.
And it's changing for the matrilineal, not matriarchal, but matrilineal parts of Micronesia to become more male-centered and more male-dominant. And the male role to be more public and the female role to be more private. But females in Palau in particular and across the rest of Micronesia do have a lot of power and influence. And they especially have it over their male siblings because land rights tend to travel through that side. Samoa is different. Samoa is bilateral, which means you can make your choice where you get from this side to this side to this side, and it's all more complex with the title system. And it is a bit more male dominant than all of Micronesia.
But you know, with the chief system, because it's very much a part of Samoa, it's still very capitalist. And I think a lot of it is more male-oriented, but I think, but I'm telling you, wrong, but I think that, people, when I see the women do have a lot of power. I mean, actually, some of the decisions.
Well, I was born in American Samoa, but I wasn't raised there. So a lot of the culture, I don't really fully know.
Yeah.
So that's where I came to America. I came here and I learned it from the Samoans here. Yeah. But what do they mean by women run things? Like, if there's an event, if there's a funeral, all the men are just sitting down doing nothing and just leading the ceremony, and then women are running around in the background doing things.
Yeah.
Do they need that, or do they need like leaders, or the mothers of their family are running things? Because men are, everyone looks up to them. One thing in America here too was another thing is. It has to do with age too. So like 2 years back, a lot of the older Samoans were living here, going to school. So we looked up to them. They ran things. They ran a Samoan club. Everything was run by them because they were older than us. And not just because they were women or men, they're older. Yeah. That's another thing that we could have looked at.
Perhaps, yeah. So, appreciate the insights. I'm willing to, there's lots of feminist research and scholarship on these societies and on the gender relationships, and I'm glad to put sort of just do some of the research and put a reader together of pieces that talk about them, people who, sort of spend time, even from post-colonial perspectives of looking at this.
And that would be, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it just seems like within the, obviously there are tons of issues here, but one of the things, what can university community do is definitely to increase awareness like that of those things. Age makes a difference. That class makes a difference. I don't know how much you run into that of, main island versus outer island in Yap, or that there are different classes. I think Americans a lot, we try to think that shouldn't matter, but it does. And I think having, maybe that's one of those things with like our seeds grants or our diversity grants, are really trying to have conversations like that. Like a reader would be great, to have pull out some of those issues. Because maybe people want to know more, but they're just not aware. It amazes me how
and there's just layers within what you just said. There's like layers too, and even though women, I just was thinking, one of the schools we actually went towards the countryside in American Samoa's lunch. We were going to debrief with the principal. The teacher just left midday, and I'm like, oh, he's catching the bus. Oh, you get to go home for lunch. No, he's leaving campus, and that's a concern, absenteeism of instructors, but just defiance. He left because he had a rugby game in town, so he was going to go play that. And so, she as the principal had talked to him, reprimanded and said, what's your priority? So she docked him, but still, she inherited 3 dud teachers from a neighboring school. And I'm like, well, why did they give it? So it's that power too. within that gender role, and then how it's manifested in the education system, and if you're only going to school or you're getting taught half a day, how good is that lesson anyways? And then on top of that, just, the content, we're in classrooms and actual content was not accurate too, so it's like, so just all these compounding things to be aware of as we are teaching our classes and sort of understanding the foundations that our kids are coming from. So it's 1:30.
It's 1:30. Just wanted to maybe ask how you would, I guess, want folks to utilize this and how.
I would say, this is always like a work in progress, and how you work with your students, if you have suggestions to add to it, because, we're going to be adding some parts of it too, just based on some more feedback that we've been getting from the first draft of this. So, feel free to email Vid or myself, or just to add some more richness and depthness and experience to this. Yeah.
I just want to say that this is really good, but just to put it out there, like, this is something that Pacific Islander students also use as a common excuse.
Yeah,
in the class when they're asking, like, I've used it before, but it's which doesn't say this is not good. It is good, but just keep an eye out for signs. There are signs there when someone is lying. And the biggest thing that I can add to this is especially because I learned this from a faculty member. I actually used one of his excuses. I had a family situation, and she said, "Oh, we all have family situations." But then she told me it really depends on how much you want this or how much you need your education. That's the bottom line. So I encourage you, faculty members, to if a Pacific Islander student comes to you and says some sort of excuse, or you see a trend of these excuses, challenge them. Tell them, okay, I've noticed the trend. Do you want this or do you not want this? Your success depends only on you.
Yeah.
So challenge them or help them to self-advocate for themselves.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think that's a great.
I've never used it, but I just honestly I have never used it. But a lot of my friends do, and they need to change their mindset. It's family does come first, but school also comes first as well. Like, I spoke to a friend who was dismissed from the university, and I said, "Well, what happened?" "Oh, some family stuff." And I was like, "What about the school?" "Oh, no. I said, "Okay, so what are your plans? What are you going to do?" "Well, I want to look after my family." I said, "How are you going to do that? Family does come first, but how are you going to do that? Get back into school." And I don't know if that student emailed you, but I kind of yelled at the person, and I was like, "Come on, you guys got to change your mindset. If you want to succeed outside of your country, outside of your island, you need to change that mindset. You can't just think like how you think back home." Also, the education system, I think, how you guys, some of the comments here are maybe give them a foundation to learn things. In American Samoa, they teach the students knowing that maybe they aren't intelligent enough to learn or be a part of something like a curriculum more rigorous than off island. Because I've had in some cases, some of the courses taught at AACC aren't as rigorous here. And I don't know, why aren't they changing it? Change the system. But no, we have to cater to our students. And that's a problem too. A few of my friends took science classes, and the professor told them, "Hey, when you go to Hilo, take the same class again, because it's not at the same level." That's another thing that affects students here too.
Yeah.
Please don't forget this. It just made me think around City of Boston.
Can you talk a little louder?
A few years ago, Siri, the one who created this special topics class and this Pacific Island literature, she had a grant, and they had a number of students in it. They created beautiful poetry, beautiful stories from a Pacific Islander perspective. And it was published, it was very successful, I don't know if you remember that. And they even had an evening reception to culminate it. It was well publicized, well received. And the students who were in it just really rose to another level. So it made me think about the women's studies class. Imagine if you had a special topics class that had this Pacific Island perspective, because every country is a different one. Every Pacific Island country has a different data set, as we were just talking about. It might be so interesting to try to raise the women's movement in that way in terms of building confidence. We were saying how they're becoming really confident, but it seems to deteriorate a little bit. But the males are more successful. I mean, and Andrew's been doing Men of Strength, a counterpart for males, something like that. But it might be fascinating as a special topic skills.
I like to think about the difference, like everyone comes to college. I like to see like if you distill the UH Hilo students down to the same ratios of the Pacific Islander students. Like, are there a lot of similarities there too between dropout and all those kind of things? But I think everyone comes to college to learn something different, you know? I'm saying like maybe teaching them the difference between assimilation and acculturation as well. You know, you don't have to give up who you are, but there are decisions to be made, and are you open to learn things and acculturate, you know, a little bit to that specific place as well. And that's what I ask my students, anybody who's in underrepresented is, you know, there are some things that may be a little bit different, but college is a time to experiment with those things. And you don't have to give up who you are. You know, but there is some stuff to be done that you would ask yourself those questions. I told a student today, like, they weren't Pacific Islanders, but I said, those are the choices you have to make.
I think that's a great way to segue into the end of the session. Thank you so much for coming. If you can have any recommendation you might have for us, any kind of follow-up or anything, put it in your survey, and you can just leave it on the table as you exit. Thank you all very much.